I'll open the floor for discussion and questions. I'll just put one slide for our thought process. How many of your organization, just for a thought process, have struggled or have seen how the clinical and non-clinical teams working together? Is that a challenge? Do you see it as a frustration? Would you like to share some of the thoughts in this domain? Okay, you said that it's been a challenge because the supply to the demand is not on the right time. So when you say supply, you're talking about consumables and things like that. So that's a challenge.
There is a gap between the administration and the persons who are providing the service. I can say most of the government institutes or autonomous bodies, and that is the challenge. The service provider, the doctors, the operating team, they don't get that kind of support from the administration, and the administration also don't understand what the service providers need. So they are working at entirely at two different level, and that is the biggest challenge most probably for we people.
Absolutely. I think you've really articulated it well. People don't understand. Everybody is working hard, but they are working in a different direction. They are working in a different direction. It is not pulling the vehicle in the same direction. Both of them are pulling. Junaid, how did you manage to address that?
Again, initially we had the bottlenecks were there, but I think due to frequent interactions, and as I said earlier, we never gave an order. It was all just a persuasion. You can please try to do it. That was the attitude which we took, and in fact, I feel that was the main thing which prompted even the clinical and non-clinical. That difference is always was there, but now there has become so little the difference. Now almost all of them work together. And another thing is, like she said, if they demand something, if you are able to give it, then they are mentally so happy that things are happening. And here we could make and for a government hospital, we could make a corpus fund, whereby the demands coming from the various wards, various staff nurses, all those people, we could immediately materialize. So once things are happening, and moreover, another thing which happened was, once we went into this motion of NABH accreditation, if people start asking, say, if they demand for something, and if there is a delay, the next thing they are, sir, we are going for NABH and this is how it's happening. So that makes we also more responsible for it.
I think that is a very important, powerful point which we also realize. Requests, you can actually put it into two broad baskets. One is simple, straightforward request, which is my chair is broken, my fan is not working, this department does not have fan. So these are requests that all of us could handle straightforward. Then there are other requests which are like, I need the latest machine, which has to go to purchase committee, which has to go to higher authorities and all that. But people see both the same way. If you give them a fan, they are as happy as if you give them a big 50 lakh machine. But if you can do those small things consistently, people think this organization can do something. This leadership can do something. It's a very powerful thought process in an organization. That's what we also find in our organization.
So this is a constant tension, an administration versus the medical fraternity. So one thing which we kind of did much earlier on is to bring a common alignment. And in the sense, in the day-to-day, people tend to forget why they are doing what they are doing. No? So if the administrative people also recognize they're actually serving the patients. They're not purchasing something, they're not repairing something, they're actually helping the patient. So if that alignment can be brought in, no, then the systems can be supportive. No? But I think if we have to work at that level also, and that really gives you a much more sustained cooperation. So otherwise, storekeeper will say, it is 6 o'clock, so I can't give you something, or 5 o'clock, already your issue time is over. No, come tomorrow. No, so that empathy for the patient has got to be there with everybody in the system, not just the medical fraternity. No, because medical fraternity becomes directly in touch with the patient, so they're able to relate directly. But somehow you got to bring that kind of alignment to the admin faculty also. So then you'll have a beautiful relationship. Yeah.
I think this is the kind of bonding that could happen. You know, how many times an organization spends trying to bring these forces together to align them in all these things. I'm not talking about a statement on the wall, but genuinely, you know, we all need to work to ensure that that patient should go within 30 minutes. That chemotherapy patient should be taken care. Then it is not the doctor has to see quickly. It is not for the doctor or the nurse. It is for that patient. Patient becomes a common target for both these groups. That's what we have. I think that's the point that comes across very strongly. Any other experiences or yeah, please.
That the patient becoming a common denominator is a very critical thing. The other thing I found is, I'll give you an example of biomedical waste. When you keep telling people it doesn't cut as much ice, but like in his case, you say we are trying to get an NABH accreditation from the head of the institution to whoever may be the lowest rung in the ladder, doesn't look at it that the director is directing you, but that we are working towards that goal, which is prescriptive to a certain extent, but it pulls people also together. So you request them saying, look, if we do this, we're going to do better. And finally, when you see the results, it's a combined achievement. Absolutely. So that also helps.
Yeah, please.
The one point which comes up very significantly in government institutions is the role of the interns, PG students, and the role of the experienced doctors. How did you resolve this kind of a diametrically, occasionally conflicting kind of dimension?
In our case, the PG students, of course, are not there. Interns are there. But there was no conflict as such. Because the interns, they come there to learn. They try to learn from their seniors what is happening. So there was no conflict as such between the interns and the consultants.
In most government institutions, this is a major area of, dissatisfaction. I find that the youngsters, most of the time, complaining that they don't get enough attention from the seniors. This is a major issue in most of the teaching institutions, at least in the state of Andhra Pradesh. This has been a major area of concern.
The difference is, so at least in our case, we are not a teaching institution. So a teaching institution, there is a difference. So that hierarchy system is there.
Yeah, we must accept that there is a breakdown in the dialogue between the PG students, the lower rung, the professionals and the seniors. Considering that those people are the main workforce for any of the major hospitals. But there is a breakdown and there is a little degradation in the interaction of these two people. And that is exactly because of breakdown in the teaching system. The teaching system is going down, and then there is interaction deficit, and that is the main problem.
Actually, sir, the government organizations in the departments, or supposing I department, works in a closed system. There is no open system. There would be no meeting as such with the head of the department. Even the senior most consultant is not able to talk to. What to say of PGs? PGs are not bothered. Whatever they are given, they will do. And they do their best. They are hard-working people. They never complain. They have to be directed properly. Whereas the problem is between the staff. The senior most professor will not talk to the immediate junior professor and discuss with him the problems of the department. So that sort of thing is there in the government department. But PGs are very handy, and if you give them proper direction, they will always work.
Dr. Rahman, how did you manage the manpower deficiency? Like, we don't get the vacancies being filled up in time, and probably it remains vacant for decades.
No, manpower, initially, as I said, initially we had some problem with the manpower. When we started the NABH accreditation, the total, the specialist consultant strength was only 43. Now it has gone up to 63. The government itself have created new posts. And through NRHM, we have got almost 12 doctors. And we have in the interns. Interns are a great help for the hospital. They, in fact, those are not, those studied in Kerala, those study outside, they come for internship to the state, in those Keralites. So almost 40 to 50 interns are there. So they are a big help. And nursing staff, we got about 73 nursing staff from the NRHM. NRHM helped us a lot to create more manpower. Of course, we cannot say it is 100% full. Say to examine 200 patients, 63 doctors, I don't know, 2,000 patients, 63 doctors may not be sufficient, but with the help of the interns, we could manage.
The paramedics.
Paramedics we have, because the Hospital Development Society is there, which is chaired by the district collector. And through Hospital Development Society, we have nearly 140 staff. All radiologists, all lab technicians are appointed by the Hospital Development Society only. No government staff is there. The Hospital Development Society is a very vibrant organization, which is the monthly turnover for the Hospital Development Society is about 20-25 lakhs. So that much turnover is there for the Hospital Development Society. And that is one factor which is helping us.
I really don't understand the society and all that. How do you form it? And
No,
how
this
do you
is a
continue?
Hospital Development Society is there for all the hospitals in the state. In fact, most of the hospital is committees, but however we have registered as a charitable society. And this is being chaired by the district collector, and the secretary is the hospital superintendent. And representatives from all political parties are there in the committee. Along with that, there are the officials like Electricity Board, Water Authority, PWD, all officials are also there. So this meets regularly on a monthly basis, and the Hospital Development Society charges minimum for the gate pass, I said 1 rupee, outpatient ticket 1 rupee, and APL patients we charge. All those income come for the Hospital Development Society. No. Then we have, as I said, we have got the laboratory. The laboratory service, it even caters to the people outside. CT scan, we cater to the people outside. We get income from there. And that is, pardon?
No, in our government, it's not allowed.
No, at least this is a government hospital and we have.
Since they have a hospital society which is of stakeholders who have a stake in the running, whether you need water, you need electricity, so all those people are represented. It's headed by the collector, the MS is the superintendent. So in a way you are getting them at that spot too. So they are constantly getting to know about the problems and they have a stake in ensuring that the hospital runs. So I think they've made a very collaborative effort which is very remarkable. So that's the thing. And then user fees is something, is a concept that's being discussed out. So I think they are taking out the fees which is coming from, they're giving the laboratories outside. What happens is most government hospitals send out to get your x-rays and your diagnostics outside. They are ensuring that the outside people also come in and there is a revenue generated for the hospital.
Almost parallel funds that is being collected by the society, madam. That's a parallel fund which is collected by the society.
Yes. And it is audited by the state government. The fund of the Hospital Development Society is being audited by the state government. It is actually by the order of the state government these Hospital Development Societies have come up.
I think I would like to just put a context since we are discussing on this. This is one way of working, and we even see this. This need not be the only way of working. There probably is more innovations across the board. Somebody within the government system has figured out, which is very similar to what it is in Tamil Nadu, what it is. So it could be different, but the difference is not a stopping point. So that is the discussion that we probably could focus on, because the differences are going to exist. It will be different from Chhattisgarh to Tamil Nadu, Kerala to Tamil Nadu. I mean, these are neighboring states. We have completely different way of executing things. Yeah, couple of points.
Dr. Arvind,
we have in our state also.
Briefly,
can we have this and then
you briefly touched upon the concept of defensive medicine. Could you just expound on that briefly, please?
The defensive medicine, what I meant by that is to escalating cost. Like today when a patient comes, we do multiple things without even clinically one is able to diagnose that he or she has a simple problem. They will get, in fact the patient is also pushing. They might want in eye care, they might want a OCT done, they might want a ultrasound done. and probably everything done before they even come to a diagnosis, which they could have come in the first place. The doctors also want to do it because they want to protect themselves. They want to protect themselves for various reasons. It could be legal, or it could be they are under pressure by the management to generate certain procedures, or CT scan or MRI. Get it done, though clinically, somebody comes with a headache today, the first intervention is the CT scan or MRI before ruling out smaller problems. That's what we meant by defensive medicine. In fact, I was in another meeting, somebody said, 30 years ago we did investigation to rule out something. 30 years now, we do 100 investigations to find one problem. So, all the battery of investigation is done to find out what that one problem is. Earlier they would locate the problem clinically, and then that's what I meant by defensive medicine. Please.
I just wanted to add that in our state also there are Rogi Kalyan Samitis, and they are there in all the hospitals.
Louder.
There are the Rogi Kalyan Samitis, and that has given an independence to the local administrator. They have wide cooperation from the people, from the administration at the local area. They have funds which they can use. And I think this concept of community participation with the wide representation generating funds is there in many other states also. It's there in our state of Himachal.
Sir, even in Madurai Medical College, Madurai College, the Lions Club and Rotary Clubs, their first priority would be to work with the government because it is seen as for public. In fact, the Rotary Club supported us with an eye bank at Arvind in Madurai. Parallelly, Lions Club supported an eye bank in Madurai GH. So I think they get a lot of, because they reach the common man through the government organization. I think we can spend a few minutes on that. Before that I would ask Mr. Nagarajan to give his inputs. The point I would like us to discuss is, how did Dr. Junaid's hospital get access to resources which were not through formal channels? And how did they make it accountable? Somebody will give X amount of money to any hospital, but if that money is not accounted properly, the second time they are not going to give it. So how did you manage to do that is something which will be interesting. And reporting back. Yes, please.
I wanted to stress the same point about it is not a difference. It is a different method of tackling an issue.
Absolutely.
And somehow if the General Hospital Ernakulam within the government system and protocol have found a method of getting resources or setting up things or working through a committee, whatever, etc. they've set up within the government system, not violating it, and having accountability, as you just said. That's a different method by which they have addressed, and that's the cross-learning which can come here. Maybe all that they have done may not be, but can that, in that form, or in a different form, as you said, the Rogi Kalyan Samiti, this thing, can you bring it about? And whenever you bring in that, to my mind, in a public health delivery system, if there is a public participatory input committee is there, that directly works as an audit checkpoint and ensuring that what is put in is well utilized. And they can't be selectively efficient. So what is put in by the government also becomes better. So it may be a good way of looking at how they went about forming it, whether it was given to them or they developed it, and what is stopping the others to get into it.
One thing, this Rogi Kalyan Samati and the hospital level society, I think they are the same. It is the same. The only thing, we have made it into a society under the Charitable Trust Act. So little more flexibility is there when it is a society. We can make, we can find our own resources and spend it. But one thing is there, whatever money we get even by donation, it has to be accounted, it has to be audited by the State Auditor General. It is being audited also. That auditing is going on on a regular basis.
Excuse me, Dr. Arvind.
Yes, sir.
Every one of us knows that we have blind spots, but I am not experienced my blind spot. But in our NPCP program, I have seen there is very big, gigantic blind spots, and the clinical practitioners to provide these services to the common people are we ophthalmologists. And there are 16,000 ophthalmologists in India. And out of these 16,000 ophthalmologists, I myself is a member of the member committee of the Ophthalmological Society India. There, in the last month, last August, we had a very serious discussion about our individual performance in cataract surgery. Out of 16,000 ophthalmologists, there are only 5,000 ophthalmologists who can do standard cataract surgery. Remaining 11,000 are not able to do it. My question is that want to direct to our beloved Sir Chakrapani and Madam Sujaya that what will be your suggestion that remaining 11,000 must be able to do the standard cataract surgery from now onwards. This question I want to put in this August House. This is very important, and this is a very big blind spot in our program.
Brought up the point which I always have been saying, that I think we have a set of non-operating surgeons who are there. And you know, it's not a laughable matter. This is something very serious that we need to consider. And like I said, if in a medical college, a professor operates one a month, and what is the kind of teaching and what is the kind of the future ophthalmologist that the country is producing? All of you all in your medical college, when you pass out MBBS, and saying, I am told, I mean, it's what comes back to me, that all of you all learn ECC, you all learn 6, you learn MICS. But then Government of India spends every year trying to train you all in the same thing. So there's a flaw in the system, it's saying. Okay, so often it is said now the mushrooming of private colleges is happening. But I think most of us sitting in this room belong to the government sector, to government medical colleges, and saying, so it's happening there also. It's not the mushrooming of private colleges alone. And there is no, I think, a community or the practice ground that is happening. So I keep saying, you see, even in graduate school, all of us went and did community service. Why is it that the doctors who are there are not going into district hospitals, not going out into the community, not working? We need to look at it, and associations like this, I'm happy at least you all discuss this, and you put your statistics, it's 5,000, I think it's very serious. I think not only for us, but I think those of us who are part of the fraternity need to think how we need to think. And as part of your CMEs, everything, I think you need to raise this question. See, our age can be a surgeon is about dexterity. It's about having the skills to do it. And after a certain age, you may not do. But then if you're not continuously doing, okay, in some of the states, this question has come up, the kind of promotions. You'll join into government service, become GDMOs, and then you're put into regular kind of duties where you're not operating. So we need to work out a system. This needs, this petitioning of the government and of the associations needs to go about. You know why you need to ensure that surgeons who are there, trained ophthalmologists, need to operate. But I'm sure many of them, and there is also the other converse situation, most of them don't operate in government hospitals. They are operating outside. They are working with the NGOs, they are operating, and the numbers are shown in the NGO, this thing. This is also a reality. So we need to think if there is thing, I'll hold everybody to their Hippocratic oath, which they pass out with. If you are to be of service to the community, please remember that. And I think if you've spent so much, your parents would have spent, the government has spent in bringing out an eye surgeon. We cannot waste that money. At least for our future generations, we need to ensure that.
Sir, I'll just interject and then I will please.
Just 1 minute. Madam, those persons, I mean ophthalmologists who are not operating in the medical college and they might be operating in outside the private clinic to earn something. We also included that person because they are producing something. And what I am worrying about those persons who are not doing operation in the medical college and not in the outside also. Their number is very large. It's more than 10,000.
Yeah, sir.
So we have to make some formula.
Yeah, sir. A couple of things, sir. I think since this discussion is about managing systems, and you're bringing a very important point, I think there are two ways to look at it. One is, what are we going to do with the 10,000 ophthalmologists? I think it's a very important question. I think multiple solutions are possible and discussed. And the second challenge is, today, a lot of postgraduates are going through training. Are they getting adequate training opportunities? Because if you are not giving adequate training opportunities, that 10,000 is already there. Some of them are getting retired. You are adding more to people here. So to increase the training, one way to do it is, imagine Dr. Junaid was saying, we are getting the 50 interns coming from outside. Why would they come there? Probably some of them come there because Ernakulam is their hometown. But I'm sure many of them come because it's a good place to get intern. Today, I think in Aravind, if we are doing not this volume, not this quantity and quality, we won't get postgraduates to come and work with us. And even at Aravind, postgraduates and fellows do 50-60% of the work, which is true like any teaching institution. We are a teaching institution. So I think this discussion, probably your question kind of brings it. Today, to make it relevant for people for future, we'll have to build a very robust and viable system with adequate volume. Imagine if there are 20 people in a department. If every day 100 patients come for surgery, no one individual can say I'll do all the 100. They will have to make the PGs do well, they'll have to make the fellows do well, they'll have to make everybody do well. So probably it is important to build a robust organization to be able to address the problem in the long term. Yeah, please. You have a question there, madam.
When we are moving in the teaching institute, we don't dishonor whatever the fellowship program and the super specialty program is going on. But looking at the subspecialties of the ophthalmology, some subspecialty really need a longer curriculum to achieve that skill. But many of the things where we see the major problem is of the avoidable blindness, that can be taken care of during your postgraduate curriculum. But all these things has to have a standard teaching institute across the country, some preferred practice patterns to follow, and the graduate or the postgraduate coming from that institute, they should have some basic minimum standard. It's not something the surgical outcome is only 20 cases per day. It's hardly the PG will get orientated. But if we have sufficient ratio, a minimum 60 to 50 cases at least per day, then the PGs will learn to this. And looking at the eye care system, what we are observing today is now a less walking patients and more is the brought-in patients. And for the brought-in patients, is as good as the backbone is the vehicle. Second is the outreach activity. So initially, what we are getting the institute as a referral and a loaded OPD, day by day the scene is changing. So for this thing, we have to initially to support this outreach activity, and the final goal is make the social awareness in the patient so that they start walking the patient to get the care. That should be your target, I feel.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So one thing I want to speak is that all the hospitals, because I am mainly pertaining to government only, they should have, there should be a benchmark for various setup that at least these many equipments and these many facilities, which are in tune with the modern, whatever modern we are doing in retina, if this is the latest, that this much should be available there, and then the performance report on these utilization of these equipment should be called for, that how many cases have been dealt there, and so that we can, and also the specialists who are trained or GDMOs who are having PG degrees, they should not be just blindly placed in the dispensaries who are not having this infrastructure, otherwise they start losing tune to the work and then they stop, first when they lose a tune, then later they develop the habit of not working and just restrict themselves to the administration. So that's how we are not able to get the outcome.
I think broadly two thoughts that come across. One is the policy level, like training, getting the right people in the right place. I think in our discussion what we are seeing is these are the cards that we are dealt with. These are the, if you are playing a card of games of cards, and then these are the cards. What can I do with the best that I can do? I think that's what Dr. Junaid's team has done. They probably have the same influence as any one of us would have with the government. They are not special in that sense. So within that ecosystem, there is, yes, they have played the cards a little differently. So is there a learning from that? That's probably a paradigm to just reflect on. I'll go, yes sir, please sir. Then, just get a
sir, in our quest to improve the system, to improve our delivery systems here, and listening to the presentations, and the wrong side of the 7th decade, we become philosophical. So I've got 3 components in this system which I've identified: Ichcha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, and Kriya Shakti. Ichcha is desire to do certain things, and the knowledge to do it, and then the methodology is the Kriya Shakti. So if each is a system, and each system of this Icha, Jnanam and Kriya have got subsystems. If you can strengthen the methodologies of improving knowledges and the methodology of doing things, then probably the governments will have to step in here. How are we going to empower people to do it? Of course, there's a long-standing question. The leaders are born or made. So let us think that they are going to be made. The administrators are going to be made. So how does the government step in to strengthen the system so that the delivery of the ophthalmic care increases in the country? So from scratch to, or probably from the mediocre or medium size to a high volume fair.
Sure. Yeah, please.
Cataract surgeries in teaching hospitals like RIOs and other medical colleges and government hospitals, we are all doing in free service. But in private sector hospitals, they are doing both free as well as paying capacity. Actually, the people who has got the paying capacity, they are taking these facilities of better IOL and better accommodation and all these things. But may I request the dignitaries and the planning madam and said that whether this thing can be implemented in the government sector so that the person who can pay can make a package of the government institutions like this, as Arvind is doing, in addition to the free services they are giving.
Sir, just a point in your case, that in Tamil Nadu, at least the CM's health scheme, the government is also claiming the money, and the government has given the machinery for them to claim the money, not in cataract, but if it comes to specialty case, because they don't support cataract. I just want to put that thought in front, please.
No, actually, this problem arises, lots of people of the middle class or higher middle class who are coming to the RIO, basically they are not initially going to the private hospitals. And they come and they are not satisfied with the waiting areas. They are not satisfied with the time taken for that waiting time rather, and the plan they want to make with the day of consultation and the operation. All these things we are observing that all these things make them defer their operation from the government hospital, and they are seeking it through the private institution. So all these things can be
thought about. Yes.
Being a manager, I would like to add, by the help of some kind of hospital development, Jeevandeep or Rogi Kalyan Samiti, you can make a mechanism. We have made a mechanism there. You can provide a facility like private they are providing to their patients, and you can charge, and out of those charge you can fix up some incentives to the medical and the paramedical staff, and that can motivate them to perform at their optimum level. One thing. At the same time, you can opt, my hospital does not have MRI, but I have outsourced. So whatever charge of MRI is taken in the private, through our setup, it is just subsidized by 50%. So out of outside patients are also coming and using their services through our own system, and that way we are getting money from those people, and they are getting subsidized charges.
So I think just because considering the time, I'll just come back. Yeah, please go ahead, and then I'll come back. Yeah.
I have a question for the panel and also all of the audience here. This question popped up into my mind in a recent conversation that I had with one of the pioneers in eye care. And the question is that he said that the postgraduate students and also the fellows who are coming out, and if I can use the word the market, he said he wouldn't, the ophthalmic people, he said he wouldn't let all these people touch his eye. Is this a systemic problem, or is this a lack of initiative from the lack of quality from the doctors of the people who are coming into the system? I haven't found an answer. I've been searching for it, and I've tried reading reports and all of that, because I'm currently with SIPS, and I'm looking for an answer for that. But I thought maybe this is a question that you would probably put to the audience and also the panel here. And now that probably even Madam can offer a policy perspective, is if it's actually systemic this thing, or is the policy flawed, or is it lack of initiative from the personal side?
I just have a clarification. I didn't understand the question properly. So just that, can you ask I'll just tell you what I have understood. So one of your friend or somebody said, I would not allow anybody to touch my eyes from...
Not one of my friends.
yeah.
He's a very elderly gentleman. I wouldn't want to name
fair
in this
enough. Yeah.
He said he wouldn't allow any of the fellows or the PG guys who are coming out in the market touch his eye.
So any position anywhere in the country?
He has a certain set of possible people whom he really this thing, but majority of the set of doctors and PG guys and ophthalmic, he writes them off. So why is it happening? And
I think it's a very broad question. I think as we have been speaking, obviously the quality of training has to go up, and it's by itself is a very big question. I think we need a lot more deliberation. I'll probably ask Madam to respond.
I think this is very relevant. Those of us who sit in government, I think it's like the school admissions. We don't want our children to go to the very schools that we promote. And I've heard my own colleagues say that, they wouldn't like to go step into most of the government hospitals to be operated there. But also, having said that, all of them would still vie for aims of institutions. PGI they would go to sing. Dr. Rajshekhar is sitting here, an excellent surgeon. Many people will go to him. I would trust myself in his hands. If I had to have an eye operation, probably I'll go to him. I would go to Ramandeep in a government hospital in RML, or I would go to Mann Singh, because I have that thing. So it is the kind of confidence that we build in our institutions. It is a kind of, there is a trust deficit that is happening with the government hospitals. And we need to reflect on this, why it's happening. It's not that it's saying. But let me also tell you, we are speaking about those people, the middle class, this thing, who would go outside, okay, and do it out. But the general public will still queue up at government, and we are saying duty bound to give them that service. They cannot afford it. They just cannot afford it. But then the question that comes up is, are we just giving them service? Are they only queuing up because they just cannot afford it? Or is it because they have the thing? Or they have no wherewithal to go into the private, this thing which charges a lot. Everybody can't go into the Polos and to the Rockland or any of those hospitals that we have in Delhi, Medanta or anything. Recently there was a case of, I know one of my own colleagues, the boy came to me and asked, his father was saying, he moved away from hospitals, Medanta treated him, and he said, Auntie, what do I do? Can I ask them? I was given and recommended a medicine, an accident victim. Do I go to a consumer court? I didn't have an answer to that young boy who's an engineer. His father is saying he's the only child. The other brother was having his exam. So he came and asked me this. So he said, if I write to the government, what would happen? What would government do against Medanta? From there, the boy took this thing to Apollo. He was also prescribed some medicines, which if there is a brain injury, the chemist told him that this should not be given. It happens. No, those are things that you have. So it's not that always private. I can tell you my own brother's case, when he had to sing, I was recommended a hospital, well known, well respected, but when he walked into the hospital and the kind of response that he got, he said, I wouldn't go there, but I would, when he went to Narayana, this thing, and to the Shetties, got himself operated. The operation was at 6 o'clock, he felt comfortable. So it's also about the kind of thing that he happens. And I know the other is a very respected hospital, but he said the way the doctor treated, if he says, if he cannot answer, is this the kind of thing that you recommend? He asked me that. I didn't have an answer to that. So that also happens. So we need to look into this. We have to make government hospital, but also like he said about the waiting areas, a certain amount, hospital management, even in Delhi. But you also have to give the kind of volumes that they take. See now RML, Safdarjung, AIIMS, 3 different. Now AIIMS, in just last week we were discussing, AIIMS is supposed to be a teaching and research hospital. But AIIMS is today like a normal hospital with the kind of this thing that we have to handle. Is it that everybody will have to be referred to AIIMS? Do we need to go? Can it be turned into a general hospital, or is it to be a top class, top-notch research hospital? This is the question. Everybody who comes, and if you are in government and you are in the health ministry, everybody feels that, you can recommend. Any question, Some very often you ask, can you recommend this doctor? Can you, just put in a word? We cannot get. Appointments are few and far to come by in names. So right up to the minister, you are trying to ask out. But is this necessary? Every politician, every bureaucrat, everybody wants to go into AIIMS. Why? I think, what are we turning AIIMS into? This is a question. Why wouldn't people go to RML or to SIM? We need to, okay, we are trying to put in place hospital management, maintenance, trying to say, you need to clean up areas, need to sink, ensure that is safe. Now I walk into a hospital, I would mostly go into a kitchen or to the toilets to see. How many government hospitals have toilets or anything, facilities that you can walk into? These are questions that need to be answered, So these are things we need to look. I mean, they've turned it around. You have seen the pictures. What the pictures he showed is typical of any government hospital. Why is it? See what differentiate, and see where are these doctors from the Apollos? Most of it, that's what the doctors in AIIMS say. Ma'am, these are all our trained doctors, but they chose to go out into Apollos and convert it. Why can't they stay in the government hospitals and do the same kind of facilities? Do the same kind of normal cleaning facilities that we need to offer. I mean, if we step into a government hospital, why is it that we are not able to take it? So these are questions that we need to ask ourselves. This is something we need to work around. I know, see now, in RML we put back, in Safdarjung, you couldn't walk, you'll find spit there are corners there, the toilets are not clean. We put in an hospital management manual, there today, it is available, it's been circulated out to all the government hospitals. Please follow that up, have a good security system. We had put in the same thing happened in Safdarjung RML. There was a private agency, medicines were being taken out and stolen in the chemist. They are sold out in the chemist shops thereby. So these are things, this happens. The simple thing that he said, now user fees or just the fees, why is it? So it's all human beings, it's all about human nature. We convert the same thing. Offices, I mean, don't go that far. Even I will tell, even in Nirvan Bhavan, why is it that we are not able to provide working spaces that are there? People say government doesn't work, it's not that. But you need to provide them an environment. You also need to ensure that the people who keep that environment, all of us have got it. All of us can clean our tables. All of us can clean our chairs. It's there. So once that message goes through, I think it seeps down. It comes down to the last person also. This is about a clean environment. We need to provide those basics. If that message goes, I think people will, that trust deficit can be overcome.
I think considering time, I'll just have her give her comment, and we will probably conclude with that comment. Yeah.
When I am coming from a government institution, but I have worked in a private institution also, and I have seen both points of view. When I am in a private institution, people come and say these problems. Where are crowding and hygienic surroundings, so I am coming to a private institution. Working in a government institution, I see patients who have been advised cataract surgery in a government institution, in a private institution, but they come to a government institution because they don't have the faith in the doctors in the private institution. They are ready to do any surgery or any investigations just for the money. So we had to do both sides. We had to more credibility for the private institution, more standard practices, instructions for them, as well as better conditions in the government hospitals.
Madam, you're bringing a very, very powerful point. I think this is a whole cycle. 25 years ago, government hospitals were the apex hospitals. Private was nowhere in the picture. Today, in all our minds, I think this recent controversy of Amir Khan, doctors are not seen in good light. I mean, we have our own inputs. So somewhere the private organizations have gone a little overboard. I'm not talking about every organization. Probably there is one or two rogue organizations. So I think somewhere trust, as you rightly pointed out, if trust can be regained, that's what we find in our own work. Focus on what is important for the patient and keep doing it, not get caught up in the game. The game is, can we charge more, can we get more money? I think very important point. I think considering time, should we have more informal conversations? Yeah, I think I'll give him, he has been up.
Especially for corneal transplantation like that.
Yes, it's all about money and trying to, right now I think roughly we average about 450 trainings a year, where we spend about 70,000 on a candidate. So that's the amount. See how much can we put in? Maybe specialized this thing and fellowships. Maybe let's see how much, depending on how much money we can get in from the 12th plan. Because you see, now we are talking about, everybody is asking for this is something that we keep discussing in the ministry. Now everybody wants a separate program for everything, you know, whether it's oncology, whether, I mean, it's cancer, it's TB, it's, CVD, strokes. Now they are talking separately about, say, lung diseases. Now they are separately talking about kidney, I mean, joint and bone thing. Could we have standalone programs, or do we need to? These are big issues that we need to think of. In fact, the working group came up with about 26 new programs under NCDs itself. So, I mean, where do, on the one hand, we say that, you know, the amount of money, of course, we still, I think, we pin our hopes on what the PM said, this is going to be a plan for health. But even with that said, I'm not very sure. We expect a doubling. Whether we will get more than that, I'm not very sure. So if we can get it out, and if we think for blindness itself, we are pegging for another 3 times more than what we have in the current, in the last year's plan. So if we manage to get that, then we need to think about, because within the ministry also now there are discussions, you know, how do we think, do we have to concentrate at the primary health, in a primary care center, and how much do we think? Because the other question is, okay, ophthalmologists are being produced, the numbers are not the thing. Because you are compared to, say, mental health, or compared to geriatrics where you don't have departments, you have to create those departments. That's not the situation with here. So what we are talking about is specialized trainings and research. How much do we invest into that? So let us see what's the envelope. We'll try to think about some specialized.
In AP we are going to start 3 eye banks in government sector. So our CFW recommended fellowship, 1-year fellowship for each candidate for one surgeon. So is it possibility?
That's what I said. It depends on our envelope, but we'll think. No, but why I said, of course, the question that you raised is this year, I mean, in fact, one situation to consider was that no more eye banks. But they, except, you know, when my own secretary took a review, then he said, Sujaya, how would it be then if we don't have any eye banks? There are some states. But even if you look at it, this year's PIP, I said only 1 eye bank in the government sector. It was a risk that I took. I may be criticized for this later on, you know, but then I did say 1 eye bank in the government sector in all the states. That means I have somewhere gone and recommended 35 eye banks across the country to add to the 650 or 700 odd, and out of which only 150 functions. I do not know whether that's the same. But all the states had been, in all their PIPs, asked 2, 3. But so this was one uniform decision that was taken out. Okay, since the states are demanding it, there is something about, you know, health is a state subject. We have these paradoxes with which we'll have to constantly, you know, work around. So we said 1 eye bank in these thing, and almost 1 or 2 eye donation centers and in this thing. So that's something we'll have to consider. But yes, Cornell, you chose an area that is important. 0.9% of this thing is there. We do have to ensure that corneal blindness, there's a lot more attention given to it and to avoid it, but we'll try to see how we can put in some kinds of trainings.
Madam, short-term training for cataplasty is enough. They have to go and improve on that. Every year we train quite a number of trainees for cornea. So they do well.
Actually, considering the time, I think we can have some offline discussion. I think I just try to get a gist in a minute. I think what we realize is if somebody wants to make things better within the challenges, government, though it is government run and owned hospital, government alone need not be the person or team to be looked up to for resources. There are various resources that are available. It could be in terms of the clubs that are available, Rotary Club or Lions Club, individual donors. But the most important intention is starting the journey. I think 2008 they started the journey. I think if journey is started, looks like there are a lot of resources available, accountability, and over a period of time credibility is built. Today probably Dr. Junaid will get more offers and he can choose offers. And that did not happen overnight. I'm sure with the adequate effort and resources that could become a reality for all hospitals. Thank you.